Okay, so let's just kick off. For the benefit of those who haven't met me before, my background is many years in corporate learning and development, and that meant that I've used 360 a lot, and I know that it is a really powerful and useful tool. And I know when it can also be a bit of a dangerous tool too. I run Actus in terms of performance management software. That's my day-to-day job. I also host the HR Uprising podcast. So if you're interested in topics like that and you haven't come across the podcast, you might want to look that up. We've got about 270 episodes on all sorts of things corporate, HR and L&D related. So all of the other things you can read for yourself. If you haven't come across Actors before, we offer a complete people performance management suite. And that means we offer things from performance management, learning management, talent management, HRIS for smaller businesses, and compliance. But very much so, we also offer 360 feedback. And we offer that as an integrated solution with our performance management modules, but we also offer it as a standalone option. And I'll just briefly mention what that is at the end. So if that's something of interest to you, you want to find out more, we'll give you the opportunity to find out more about that. So what the focus of this particular session is about, and I say this is, I suppose, a bit less theoretical than some of the webinars. I think I'm doing a podcast, don't I? But a little bit more practical. So this is quite a practical example. Well, we'll go through these. We'll even have a look at what a 360 feedback report might look at and consider how you might think about providing the feedback. It's all quite high level, but it's just going to give you a feel for 360 if it's something that you are less familiar with. And that's where I'm going to go to the chat to find out a bit more about you on here. So let me know in the chat, have you experienced 360-degree feedback yourself? Is this something that you've received in terms of 360-degree feedback? And if so, what was your personal experience of it? Was it something that you found a positive experience or otherwise, or have you delivered 360 feedback with other people? Share in the chat what your thoughts are, and also really interested as to what's brought you to this topic, why it's of interest to you. Now, I know it takes a moment for the chat for people to type and for it to come in, so I'm just letting a few other people in as we do that. But just give us a feel for who has experienced 360 degree, what's your thinking of it. And also, if you're on here, are you here because you're thinking of using it, or you're curious, you've never used it? It'd be really good to have a sense of that. Thanks, Steph. So you've delivered 360 and they've been appreciative and found it useful. And it is, so what you're basically saying, you've done, I'm presuming you've done the debrief of a 360 report, Steph, and really helped them to get the best out of it. And that is good practice, which is really key to make sure that if you've got coaching skills to support people in interpreting a 360-degree feedback report. Samantha's saying she used to deliver it in a previous role. Yes, when you get the aha, it is very powerful, isn't it? And again, I'm liking this in terms of your people who've delivered it. Where I've experienced organizations that have had difficult experiences is where they've run something like 360 feedback and then just sent the reports out. And the reality is feedback, 360 feedback depends on the maturity of an organization as to how well people word things, and it can take a while for organizations to do it well, and for managers and leaders who are providing feedback to provide good feedback. So Iglika, I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. It's a great for self-awareness. It's a really good development tool for leaders when they've got lots of the core skills, but they want personalized feedback, because you get that real insight into things. Really, you're looking to do it with leaders, which that's a good fit there. Oh, I've got a list. I was thinking I'm giving myself feedback. It's not very often I haven't. Welcome, Lucinda. And I'm wondering, is it Lucinda that I work with the data barracks? I don't know that many Lucindas. So great. Or are you a different Lucinda? Thinking I typed myself a statement there. So Pedro, this would be new to you. So something here. Nicola, accredited to deliver a particular. Yeah, so if you've got the accreditation, you've got the skills to do it, then it's actually looking at what you want your 360 to deliver. And actually something like ours is something which organizations can customize. So you might align it with your organizational competencies or values or whatever it is that you wanted, maybe for a talent program. So you can customize it as opposed to, say, doing 360 Thomas or something like that, where it's against a specific set of criteria. Hi, Emma. Yes, I have done some of you. Great. Okay, so oh no, hello Lucinda. It's nice to meet you. A new Lucinda. It's a bit bizarre. Sorry, going on about this. It's quite weird when you're called Lucinda because you don't meet that many, so it sort of makes you extra possessive over your name in some strange way. It's nice to have you. So what I'm going to do then is, some of you are really familiar. So some of these early slides are maybe a bit basic for you, but equally some of the later ones you might be able to add value for others. So it's going to be a whistle stop overview. So when we're talking about 360-degree feedback, let's just set the baseline. So what do we mean when we're talking about it? Well, it's usually quantitative and graphical feedback, but also it's much richer if it also has qualitative, i.e. comments within that 360 feedback. And those would be against, as I alluded to before, against a specific criteria. So you might find that certain proprietary psychometrics have their own 360, which you'd analyse against, or you might want to bring it into your organisation, take your competencies or values and identify criteria to assess people against them to develop people. The key is you need to make sure that the specific criteria you're measuring against are relevant and appropriate to the person that's taking part in it. Then the feedback that you receive, it's written feedback, it's ratings and written. And I encourage you to make sure there is always some written feedback in a 360, because that's what brings to life a specific rating. And the reason it's called 360 feedback, and you could have 180 feedback, the idea is it's from sources all around the individual. So I might go up to get feedback from my manager, I might go sideways to go from my peers and customers, and I might go down to get them from my direct reports. Obviously, depending on the role that I've got, the degree, the extent to which you go all around would vary. My recommendation is that ideally responses are anonymised. There are some organisations that like to attribute, but they tend to, it's certainly to start out with, it's good that they are anonymised, but with some education for people around what good quality feedback comes from. But in terms of that, the line manager, it's normal that the line manager, their particular rating would stand out on its own. So they're less so, because you'd expect a manager to be able to provide verbal feedback. And when I'm saying anonymised, what that might mean is that if you're doing a rating, you'd make sure that there's at least 3 people are contributing to a specific rating. And obviously they don't have actually attributable comments. The purpose is to really help people see objectively, or relatively objectively, how their behaviours are perceived. It's still not fact, but it's how you come over in terms of others perceive your behaviours, which is really valuable, particularly for people developing their careers or moving in leadership roles, because it can really help them improve there. And as others have said in the chat, there are a few tools in my experience that are more powerful if managed well, if it's the right questions, and if the debrief is done well in terms of that. In terms of feedback and rating of feedback, if there's evidence from the CIPD that if people see that 360 feedback, or when they're providing feedback, that it's related to that person's development to help them grow, as opposed to reward, then it tends that they're much more honest, and so that you get better quality feedback, as in more honest feedback, when people see it's for their development. And so that's why I would always prefer to see it as a developmental tool as opposed to an assessment tool. And that maybe leads into some of the potential challenges. And maybe you've come across some challenges in your organisations. Have any of you experienced that, where people have not had a good experience, or maybe come in and they've been cynical about it, or perhaps in your organisation, some of you are thinking about starting it. You might say, I don't know if our organisation's ready for this. There can be fear. And I mean, if you think about anything to do with feedback, full stop, if I said to you, I'd like to give you some feedback, in most cases, people actually have this sense of going fight or flight. They say it's almost from a neurological point of view, it actually it embeds fear in us, because we're fearful of feedback as opposed to welcoming it. And that's conditioning, I guess, that we haven't all grown up in psychologically safe learning cultures, but it can instigate fear. And so therefore you've got to make sure you introduce it in a way which is safe. And that's why I would always say you should make sure that things are anonymized appropriately. You educate people about what good quality feedback is, i.e. it's specific and factual. And also you debrief it, you use someone to coach that feedback back to the individual, because psychologically individuals are very inclined to look for negatives. And so that's the key. That's an interesting one, Laura, in terms of whether people should have access to all reports or if they're personal to individual. So that, in my view, is a cult is a you need to decide on that. That is down to your organisation, and if you're trying to build trust, what we did in the organisation I was in is we basically said it was something that was personal to the individual. It wasn't going to be used for any sort of anything else at that point. And initially, certainly to build that trust in terms of that, and we would encourage them to share it with their line manager. Now, that's fine, although it can be really powerful if you're able to amalgamate results from an HROD point of view, as you're talking about, and see where your organisation is in terms of key competencies and look to improve them. For all these, I think it's really about making sure that there aren't any repercussions, that people become fearful or they think that their 360 feedback has impacted negatively on their career in some way. So it is about building trust. And that's exactly why. So we need to make sure that these challenges are factored in. So not every organisation is mature enough, or if they're not, it doesn't mean they can't be, but you need to go in baby steps and you need to message really clearly why and how it's going to be managed. And you need to make sure that people are able to build that they don't have a bad experience with it. And as you go through that cycle, I remember I felt that it took probably 3 years in the organisation, which is quite a large organisation that we were in, for people to go through it and really start to be really open and honest in terms of their feedback, and it started to get some really good quality. Just seeing that someone's in the waiting room trying to let in. I think I was annotating them as opposed to letting them in, which isn't very helpful. So the other challenges is with any kind of feedback, perception isn't necessarily reality, and it can feel like it is, but people might feel that they're being judged in some way. And so we have to manage that. And if the feedback isn't delivered well, people can feel highly sensitive to it and they can react quite emotionally to it. As a sales director that I once delivered, that Steve, who is if he's still on the call, will remember. And I remember him storming down a corridor saying, "Who said this about me?" Now, anything like that, if a leader overreacts to something, then that takes you steps back in terms of the positive of 360. Now, I think most firms have become more aware. Most people are. It's not. That is probably 25, 30 years ago that experience happened. So people are better. But still, you've got to be sensitive to people's emotions and help them to interpret the feedback in a positive way. So these can be the challenges that you experience with this. And you have all of these downsides. So what we're saying really is to do it well, as many of you are already doing. You want to not just do 360 reports. You need to make sure that somebody in your organisation or external will also support the facilitation or the coaching back of the results to make sure that people have a positive experience, and that is where you're going to influence your feedback culture in a positive way. The benefits of this, then, they are definitely greater if you do it well. It's super powerful in terms of, as someone said earlier, it gives you an aha moment in terms of understanding what it is that you're doing well and what you can do even better. And that means that it's really good for retaining key staff and for career development. And for people being, if let's say someone's going for a next role and they haven't got through, it helps them see where they can focus their development, or it gives much more objective outline as to what skills specifically they need to develop. So it's really useful for specific development areas, which as people go more senior in an organisation, quite often they've had all of the generalised training. So you want to give them things which are personalised, and it's also really time efficient, because although you are investing in that one-to-one coaching to debrief it, it does make it a much more time efficient way of delivering some sort of personalised feedback. What I also like about 360 is you get specific behavioral examples if it's done well, which help people to really put their finger on what it is that is the key to their success in the workplace, or less so. And in this hybrid world that we're in at the moment, it can increase visibility for people and awareness as to how they're being perceived, because they may only being visible over Teams now, as opposed to talking to people in the corridor. And the other thing about that with the hybrid idea is that if you are office based and other people are not, and your boss is office based or not, you get a proximity bias. So 360 feedback can be really helpful to sort of provide balance in that area. And the point above, which is worth just emphasizing, is our line managers don't always know what we do. And increasingly, let's say you are working in a virtual team or internationally, your line manager may see a real fraction of what it is that you do. So gathering feedback from other people who work with you is going to be much more useful for your effectiveness and also for the line manager to truly know how someone is doing or performing. So it's a great way of doing it. So those are sort of pros and cons. Now, what I'm going to lean into here is a little bit of the practicalities. So if you're doing it, you're probably thinking about this. If this is something that you are planning to do, then these are things to consider. And they're sort of things that we work with organisations to support in a trainer fashion if they need it. So if you're about to roll 360 feedback to your organisation, first of all, be strategic. Think about what is the purpose of this. So it's probably more effective if you're working with, let's say, a mid-level manager and they want to go on to be the next level up manager, to assess them against a template that reflects the behaviours or competences of the next level up manager. Now, I realise that by default here, I'm saying that you might have more than one level of template. So if you come up with different templates, it's almost about what you want them to get. This is a gap analysis for the job they want to go to, because that's going to make it a more powerful development tool. If you have a very generic one size fits all, it's interesting, but it perhaps doesn't give you the granularity. So it's got to be appropriate for the role and the seniority. I think that's the key. When you're looking at questions, I've seen 360 feedback with 50 questions. The problem with that is, well, basically people lose the will to live in terms of that, and the quality of the written feedback will reduce if you have too many questions. The other thing to be really careful, this is basic questionnaire design, is the statements that you're asking. Usually it might be a statement that you ask people to agree strongly or disagree strongly with. Well, the statement that you're sending out there, you need to make sure you're not asking two things in one sentence. It's really easy to do that. You might say, so this person is a great listener and asks good questions. Well, maybe they're a great listener, but they don't ask good questions. So that means it's harder for the person to respond objectively, which means the results come quite confusing. I would suggest that if you're going to do something like this, roll it out top down. So why am I suggesting to roll it out top down? The reason I suggest that is that ultimately, because it's 360, everybody wants senior people to give feedback on them. And the senior people are the most busy people. And the senior people may be like, oh, I haven't got time for this, not seeing the value in it. So you really want the senior people to understand actually how valuable it is having that 360 feedback, receiving it, and actually how slightly nerve-wracking it is. So they take it seriously and they provide good quality feedback for those next level down. And then they will basically, you're setting up a cultural approach, which is going to be more effective than if you start lower and do more of them and people are a bit dismissive. So it's really making sure that you manage something, and I wouldn't therefore roll it out to too many people at the same time. Once worked with the hospital trust where they're insistent on running it out to 300 managers all at the same time. I think that's just not a good idea, because of course everyone's asking everyone to give feedback on everyone, because the average report has got, let's say, 9 or 10 bits of feedback. So everyone's requesting feedback from everyone at the same time. So that isn't going to be a recipe for good quality. People are going to rush through it or not do it. So think about it strategically, roll it out top down, and make sure that you don't do too many in a 3-6 week period. So just, you can do people in batches is the way to do it. Minimum response numbers. we recommend that. I would say you always want within a group a minimum of 3 responses. So that might mean you need to invite 4 or 5 people to respond in order to make sure that there's some representation. So it's not just an anonymity, it's actually about objectivity and representation. We've mentioned 3 proper feedback and coaching. And then the 2 other bits that I'll drop into a little bit is when we're going into the 360 feedback coaching, I always have a standard way of setting the scene, is even with someone who's had it many times before, and you basically sort of remind them that this is a snapshot in time. It isn't a reflection of who you are a person, it's people's perception. I'd ask a little bit about who they asked feedback from, because they might have gone out to their mates, in which case they might deserve to be challenged a bit more, or they might have gone out to people who they think they have challenging relationships with, in which case you've been a bit more supportive, or that gives you insight into the type of responses that you've got, and also how psychologically safe the person is that you're providing the feedback for. So there's a specific set of questions or certain things that I always do to set the scene before going into the 360 feedback. So I don't show people their report without setting the scene, and then I show the report. And that is for me the best way, because it allows you to manage any reactions. If in the 2-3% of cases that there's a statement that they don't like or don't agree with, or hits negatively, it allows you to manage it positively. 98% of the time it's absolutely fine. And as a coach also, you want to keep the focus constructive and developmental. So what do you learn about that? What do you think it was that you did that meant that somebody provided that feedback? What would you do differently next time? What's your takeaway from this? All those kind of coaching developmental points. Whereas as opposed to letting people drill into something as a possible negative and get hung up on it. So those are things that I always say, setting up for success in terms of how you set that up for your organisation to do it well. Where I believe it fits best, senior leader development supported by coaching. So it's a great opportunity to identify a gap analysis. It's also good if you are trying to measure or embed new values or competencies. So let's say you want to really create a culture change and you want to do values-based leadership. You could define some statements based on those values or competencies and assess people against those. And then you could report on that at a higher level and see at the moment our organisation is tracking at 3.2 for whatever leadership criteria it might be, strategic thinking. And we want to set a target of 3.5. And so you could actually track that progress. Now, if you're doing that, you are seeing, Laura's point that you are seeing some macro results, but you can keep it personalised as well. Great opportunity to be part of an assessment centre. So if you're looking to develop people, it fits nicely with an assessment centre alongside other activities where people get feedback. And another area I used to use it in is if you were rolling out a training programme, it's quite a good way to, if you've defined that training programme to meet specific criteria, then you could benchmark the start with your cohort of people and then measure them again 18 months later against these competencies that hopefully you've been developing on the course. And assuming they go up, then you're illustrating some ROI. So it gives you some evidence that skills are developing within the organisation. If you've got any other questions or comments on that as to how you might use it, please feel free. If anyone's got any other points that they've used it on, then do suggest those. Now, rhetorical question: what do we want people to get out of 360 feedback? How do we want them to feel? Well, I'm sure you would be saying things like motivated, right? You want them to feel motivated, you want them to feel excited about the future, you want them to feel positive, you want them to feel valued, you want them to feel challenged, but in a good way, recognised. So you want them to have positivity out of it. Now, that doesn't mean that you want everything in 360 feedback to be positive, because actually you find that people don't really love that. They actually want to see some meaty development points, but they get those if they think that they are objective. So you want them ideally to have real specific learning points that people can take away from it. But ultimately, you want them to feel that it was a really powerful learning tool and it had really high positive impact. And it does have the potential to do that, but really only if you manage it well. So this is where, again, high level, for those of you who are coaches out here, and those of you who would want more support with this, is the sort of thing that we can do train the trainer on as well. I would, if I was sitting down in the 360 with an individual, this is the sort of structure that I would deliver. And in a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of examples for you to have a look at and see, oh, how would I do this if I was feeding back on this? So I would, first of all, position my role. Now, this is quite important if you are an internal person. So let's say you are someone from HR and you're delivering the feedback. First of all, what I'd say is if you are the HR business partner for a specific type area of your organization, if you're big enough to have different directorates, I'd actually say it's better to give feedback to leaders outside of your directorate potentially. So almost to give you that neutrality. But if you are, if you are the HR person in this organization and you're providing the feedback, then what I tend to do is go, this is not me with my HR hat on. I'm in an organizational development hat, or I've got my coach hat on today. So this is between, and I would set the scene as to the levels of confidentiality, who is or isn't going to see that, and that's down to your organization, but make sure people know. And say, this is us. This is basically a coach relationship for the purposes of this. You're not going to go running off saying or talking about their feedback. And they want to know how they feel about it and how they selected their feedback givers. And I mentioned that earlier because that gives you great insight into what the feedback should or might look like. If they have any expectations or concerns, good opportunity to manage those there. And then that's where I go into the setting the scene, which things like this is a point in time. This isn't about you as a person, good or bad. I'd also make the point that some people are naturally high markers, some people are low markers, like at school. So it's just positioning all of those things before we go into the feedback. The reason I think it's really important to set the scene up front is people are listening to you at this point. If you dive into the feedback and there's something in there that they don't like, they are then just focusing on that thing. And you might say, it's just a moment in time. Some people are high or low markers. They're not listening. Right, so it's almost inoculating. You're saying up front, this could happen, and if it does, it's really normal. Then don't worry. So if they then have to say, remember we said some people are high markers, some people are low markers. They hear it, but only if you set that scene up front. So it's important not to dive right in. Make sure they're going to look for themes, developmental and positive. So it's almost as important to find things that people do well and to celebrate them and find opportunities to do it more than it is to find gaps that they need to fix. And again, I go, if someone finds something, they go, I don't think of myself like that. So, well, what do you think you might have done that would give someone that to give you that feedback? What sort of thing? And then I said, well, actually, I had a blazing argument in the corridor with somebody on this occasion, or I gave them fantastic feedback and took them out to lunch. Any of those things could have influenced that person's feedback because it is situational and time sensitive. Then once you get to the end, so you're trying not to go through you've got to go through at a reasonable pace because they will then reflect back on it later, is identify areas that they might want to do more of or to get more feedback on. And then I would get them to capture key actions, but not too many. What are the most key, 2 or 3 key takeaways that they want to work on? And then if they're going into a coaching relationship, those can be relevant for them to then go forwards with. So that's a really simple high level structure. Hopefully that makes sense. And then if you are having if you've got something like some challenging feedback, and I'll give you an example on this one, you could have you use your coaching skills here in terms of that, who, why. This is what I might do if I've had a sneak preview of a report and thought, ooh, that looks a bit challenging, then I would spend longer setting the scene. And I might say, who was it you asked? Why did you choose them? What sort of feedback are you expecting? And the really interesting thing is I can think of a handful of times where I've looked at the report and thought that's a really challenging report to feed back. And actually, when I've asked these questions, they've said something like, well, I've got a really difficult relationship with these people in XYZ country, and I thought I'd see what they really think of me. So I was like, oh, okay, so you're expecting some challenging feedback. They're saying, yeah, I think they hate me. And I'm like, great. It's good. It's not as bad as that. So just by having those conversations up front, you're getting ahead of it. You know what they're expecting, but you're also kind of managing their expectations and cushioning it. Equally, if it's all really soft and fluffy, say, okay, so I might think, this person needs a bit of challenging. They've just gone out to their mates, have they? why is that? Are they scared, or is there something else? Well, how do they need to challenge themselves? Because clearly they don't feel secure enough to go and ask people who aren't their mates for things. So it's all this information up front when you've had a sneak preview of the report can be really quite useful, because then that feeds into how you set the scene. Can I just check? Does that make sense to you? You can give me a thumbs up or ask any question. Anyone got any questions at this stage in terms of that? I'll keep going and I'll keep an eye on the chat. So these are the points that I've already kind of talked about, but this would be what I would use. So if those of you want, you can take these slides if you were doing your 360 feedback. These are the things that I would make sure that I cover when I'm setting the scene up front. So, okay, let me go back. So my next one here. Any questions? Now, what I'm going to do is I've got a couple of example 360 feedback spider graphs. So spider graph is the bit on our system where it summarizes all of it right at the front. It feels like a nightmare. It really isn't. But so what I'm really doing is I'm actually running through here, Sylvia, almost a kind of a train the trainer in high speed. So what we'd do if we were doing train the trainer with somebody is I'd get people to practice it. But it's giving you a feel for hopefully some of the tips you could do if you're already doing the 360 feedback, which some people on this call are. Hopefully this could help you improve the way you're delivering the feedback. If you've got ideas or you want to broaden your 360 feedback team, get in touch, because we can help you with 360 train the trainer. But the main thing is getting them level. What level of feedback to OD would you expect from the external facilitator giving the feedback? That's it. I'm sorry, Laura, that's it. I was thinking the same question. So good question, Laura. It really depends on what you've contracted to in the first place. And because it's a bit like if I was coaching for an organization, I've been brought in by OD, and I've probably been brought in to coach for a reason. And therefore ideally what I would do is I would agree what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, look, I'm not going to share any confidences, but I will give broad feedback, and I would agree with my coachee or the person that I've done the 360 feedback for, say, what are you happy for me to share, or what are you happy to share? And to be honest, if they've had a good coaching debrief, they're probably quite happy for most of it to be shared, because they feel they've come to terms with it, or they're quite happy with it. If I saw something, sometimes I might say that there looks to be maybe some conflict between this person and a group of people, or there seems to be some, because you don't necessarily know whether it's about the person. You do see, in fact, one of these reports, you sometimes see almost cultural issues coming through in feedback, in the way feedback's written. And if I saw something cultural, I wouldn't say exactly what it is, but I would say I'm seeing some conflict or cultural issues from this team, or some conflict there. But what I would say is I'd do that if that was how I'd been contracted with the OD team to come in and support, because there are probably some cultural issues, and I would want to make sure that whatever you do, you need to make sure that you're being open and honest, and not talking out of school. And so equally, if I might say, I am going to be providing feedback to OD because we're aware we've come in this, but I won't give any feedback that I haven't agreed with you. That's what I would want to do. So I'd want to make sure that as a coach, if you're delivering it, that you are being honest and you're not betraying confidences. I think there's also, if you did do something where ratings overall, it's different. It's about written comments. I think the main thing is you've got to set up the 360 feedback and be clear about the level of visibility that there's going to be in it up front, and people need to know from the start, and just be consistent and open with that, and be honest. That's the key. If you say, well, we are going to show it with OD, but it won't go beyond OD, and the reason it's going to OD is because they're going to design courses, or they want to come in and help address the cultural issues in the specific team. As long as people understand why and what the purpose is, then and they kind of trust where it's going, then I think it's fine. But you've got to be open and honest up front. I've got to say, I'm probably, having run this in big organizations, and I know Laura where she works, and is it's actually, if you're a small business, this can be so powerful and really easy. I'm probably picking out some of the more difficult things because they're the things that people worry about, but they really, really are the exception. So it can be very simple, very straightforward. And actually, if you're a small business, it's the sort of thing you could get someone else to come and deliver for a bit, and you could just trial it out with a small group of people. So don't let it put you off. It's one of those things. It's like if you talk to medics, you hear all the horror stories, but most of the time it's absolutely fine. But sticking with the stories, let's have a look at this. If you're somebody, you're going to deliver 360 feedback, and you're just having a quick look in here. What I'd like you to do is have a look at this and think, what are your thoughts? And tell me in the chat, what would you be thinking? What questions would you want to ask up front to this person in order to set the scene and to understand the context? So just to see this, so don't worry about the competencies. They could be whatever you like, but you've got other, so let's assume that that's customers and other colleagues. Direct report, and that's purple. Direct reports are in blue. Yellow is the individual, and the manager is in red. So if you were looking at that, what would your hypothesis be about this person? And what sort of questions might you want to ask them just to get the scene set before you went into the meat of the questionnaire? Give you a moment to get your head around it. I've just got two of these. Any thoughts? I'll tell you what I would think. Well, I'll give you a chance to come up with your own thoughts. Good feedback from that exercise overall. So yes, so absolutely. And so you can see they've got quite a lot of people who seem to be rating them more highly than themselves. So I think what I would think, why does this person manage rate? Why are they rating themselves significantly lower than others? Which would be an interesting one. Particularly in this managing performance, what is it about managing performance that makes them think that they're underdoing it? The interesting things about someone who manages themselves, yeah, exactly, Laura, great minds. What is it about someone like this that sometimes someone like this, what they're lacking confidence, so they don't want to. I mean, it's very British, and they don't want to feel that they are that they don't want to overrate themselves. They don't want to be immodest. So it's almost like they'll rate themselves down a bit because and if everyone else thinks it's better, it's like, phew, there's a little bit there. But I would be interested as to who these other people are. Is this person absolutely brilliant at delivering to their customers? But doesn't see that, their manager doesn't see that. Why is it that their manager is seeing? What's their relationship with their manager like? Because they seem to see themselves similarly to their manager, but maybe their manager doesn't see them how others see them. And that's where it could be useful to, at the end, have a conversation. Why don't you go and show your manager that this is what the other group are rating you? So there's lots of things there. It's just like, be curious. It's what are your curious questions when you look at the shape of something up front that you might ask to explore it. So something like that, you kind of go, well, they're going to be quite pleased, basically, because they're going to have a nice surprise that others seem to rate them more highly. Although, what does that say about them? Are they underrating themselves? Are they a bit needy? What is it? So it's just interesting as to where that might be. How about this one? So the yellow is self, the blue is direct reports, and the purple's other, and there's no manager. Yeah, no line manager. So what does that say? Well, this is interesting. This is a real example, and it's one that I actually didn't do because I wanted to go back and talk to the line manager. And clearly, this was an example of cultural issues. This is an example of somebody that had been sent to have a 360 feedback to try and fix them, but no one was going to talk to them. No one was going to tell them what was right or wrong. And also, to be honest, scores that low. Yeah, and that's the thing. Scores that low. That's not constructive, is it? So to me, it just went red flag, red flag, organizational culture. What's going on? What is going on here? So that was one of those that that doesn't, that something doesn't stack up. And then bear in mind that this is out of a 5-point scale. It's not like the person said they walk on water. So I thought that would potentially signal quite a vulnerable person. And if the manager isn't going to come in and provide some feedback constructively, and of course this was an example of one where there's no comments, right? So no way of helping somebody. So you'll never get something like that. I've done hundreds or thousands. You wouldn't see that, and you'd always be managing a culture of it. But something like that, you go, that's total red flag, because you ideally wouldn't have that. Now, saying that, I have seen one where there is a gap between the individual on the outside and others in there, and that is an example of one where I said, okay, tell me about your relationship or who you chose. And they went, yeah, I really wanted some tough feedback. I went to these people who were challenging, and yeah, and they were like, oh, actually, they don't think I'm that bad. So it's not always a bad thing if the person is outside. It's more the difficulty is where the expectations don't match. Agree, Stephen. And that's the thing, is the direct reports aren't going to in this environment, because they've kind of basically stuck the boot in on a 360, and no one's helping anyone. It's a good example of a company you wouldn't want to work in, honestly. So yeah, yes, exactly. So those are just some illustrations that you can think about. It's all about preparing. That's when you're coaching 360. If you prepare well for it, then they will get a good experience, and it'll be a powerful thing. And that doesn't mean preparing hours of research. It's just using a similar structure to the ones I've been sharing. I'm just being curious and about setting the scene up front so that you know where people are. Yes, Laura, exactly. Um, So what I then do, you've gone through your feedback, and I usually would take about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on the seniority or how much detail you're going into. So then I would recommend that they identify 2 strengths that they want to do more of and they should build on. 2 development areas, so no more than that, right? They can go back and do more later if they want to, but 2 strengths to build on, 2 development areas. And it's really important that they do recognize strengths, because people tend to just drill into what they want to develop. If you can persuade them to, I think it's really good practice for them to just send an email out to their contributors and say, really appreciate you providing feedback to me. They don't need to say more, but if they're happy to say, these are my strengths that I'm going to work on, and these are my development areas I'm going to work on, even better. Why is that a good idea? It's a good idea because you're trying to build a feedback culture, and people have invested the time in giving you feedback. So you closing the loop and saying, I really appreciate it, this is what I learned, means that they're much more inclined to give quality feedback again next time. Um, never chase down someone for a negative, and I always would say, and I always make that point at the end as well. I say, if possible, it'd be great if you would share this feedback with your manager or your coach, so that you can incorporate it into a development plan. I mean, if you are their coach, then obviously you can work with them on it, and then you can have further discussion. So those are things that I'd always wrap it up with. Yes, people with feedback on their relationship with the person, and so sorry, is that a question? And manager believes it. Are you asking a question there? Sorry, A Shard. I'm not quite sure if that's I'm happy to answer it if it's a question, but I'm not 100% sure what. So okay, so are you suggesting that if somebody has a negative relationship with the manager and the manager believes the feedback is true and it damages their self-esteem, that's why, if that's what you're saying, that's why you set it up front and say, what is your relationship with these people? And then if as a coach, if I see that some stuff is unfairly critical or potentially coming over in a certain way, they might say, so what is it? It's our responsibility as a coach to help the person protect their self-esteem and think, okay, so what is it about the behavior? It's about behavior, not you as a person. What behavior is it that you're demonstrating that makes them provide that feedback? Or equally, what is it about that person that makes them want to provide feedback like that? It's not always about you, as we all know. It can be about the other person. And that's why it's important to have the coach to be the, ally of the person receiving the feedback, to make sure that they don't take it personally in a negative way, that they just take what's useful, they take what's constructive out of something as opposed to what's critical. So then, yes, so any other questions, hit me with those in the chat. I'm more than happy to do those, or follow up. You've got my email when we come out. If you are thinking about doing 360, obviously, if you're a performance management customer, you can use our 360 module, but we do also have this really easy off-the-shelf 360 Now product, which has a list of questions, so you can get going with it really easily. And if this is something you're interested in, and you want support in the train the trainer, then I will do the train the trainer and I can help design templates. So if you want to know more about anything like that, just come back to me and we can talk to you about it. Emma's saying, would you revisit it? I think definitely as part of an ongoing development. I think probably every year is too frequent. I'd say every 18 months to 2 years. So the business I used to work in, we used to do it. We did it every 2 years for a management population of about 300. We did alternate sometimes with 180 feedback, but it is something to revisit. And it doesn't matter if relationships pair change, and it doesn't matter if the template changes, although there is a benefit of having the same template. But definitely, I think it's really valuable as part of ongoing personalized development, because people can see whether or not they're still, have they actually changed some of the things they wanted to work on, or have they progressed or otherwise. Grace has dropped in, if anyone does want to see Actus 360, know more about it, then do feel free just to come to come on there. We can tell you all about it. And this is just my screen, which got, if you want to know more about what we're doing next, we're going back to appraisal, demystifying appraisal conversation. So practical again there in November. There's a QR code if that's easier for you to find it. They're obviously on the website, and all of the useful links are here for you. And this will be sent out to you post this call. So thank you so much for joining. Sorry it went slightly longer over because it went a little bit into training. And I'll say in here just for any other, if anyone wants to disappear, please feel free. Thanks. Nice to almost see you, Steph. And I'll just stay on if there's any other questions. If staff change in leadership position, is it? Yeah, I think that would be a great idea to do it. Although if you're brand new into role, Stephen, I would make sure that they've been managing people for at least 6 months before getting them to do it, because people need to have got a view. So it's quite hard to provide 360 feedback for somebody if you haven't worked with them for a while. So yes, if they're brand new into that role, I'd get them to, from the direct reports point of view, to be in role for a little bit. And the other thing is, as I said right at the start, is if they've gone into a more senior role, or if they're going up the organisation, make sure the template represents the behaviours of the role they've moved into. Thanks, Lucinda. Thanks, everybody. Even right. So that sounds like they've used 360 feedback rather than which that's a good example. Sorry, I don't know what your first name is. It's a good example of where it's, to be honest, it's poor management. This is not how you should use 360 feedback. You should have that conversation with the line manager. Now, I suppose there is a thing where if you had 360 feedback and whoever, let's say it's not you, that you'll have, if there's someone who is having difficult relationships with colleagues and they're not aware of it or what the specifics are, then 360 feedback could be useful, but really only if colleagues are going to give quality feedback and there's going to be a supporting developmental coaching process to get through the 360. So yeah, that sounds like that it was the wrong tool for your situation, is what to say. That's where I wouldn't really think that 360 is a good thing to do. Sounds like, so that I can imagine that was difficult for you. If there's any other questions, or if you want to speak, if you want to, say Shada, I don't know what your name is. If you want to drop speak, then feel free to unmute and turn the camera on, and I can have a chat with you. Anyone else wants to pop off, or any other questions? And I'm not going to say Anshel. Okay, yeah, I'm sure that was really difficult, and that's not your fault. That's just an example of where 360 has been used in a blunt way, and often it's in environments where people are not courageous enough to provide good quality feedback to help people to grow and be self-aware. And so then you get it in that 360, it's kind of it's not well written, it's not well communicated. But if you're in an organisation and you want to do it well, if you follow the sort of themes that we're saying here, you can have a very different experience. So yeah, tricky. Okay, so anyone else, if you want to reach out to me, I think actually, yeah, you can book a 20-minute chat in with me if this is something you want to do, not on a public zone. I'll close the meeting down, but thank you so much for joining. I hope you found that useful.